which a teacher observes and makes a judgment about the student's demonstration of a skill or competency in creating a product, constructing a response, or making a presentation. Performance assessment. An emphasis on a student's ability to perform tasks by producing their own work with their knowledge and skills, such as singing, playing a piano, dancing, and etc. Basically, it is the student's application of knowledge. Though even if that's the case, still, it is important to assess students' learning not only through their outputs or products, but also the processes which the students underwent in order to arrive at these products or outputs. Information about outcomes is important, yes, but to improve outcomes, we need to know about students' experience along the way, about the curricula, teaching, and kind of students that lead to particular outcomes. Also, assessment can help us understand which students learn best under what conditions. With such knowledge comes the capacity to improve the whole of their learning. Overall, this all pertain to process-oriented assessment. So in short, process-oriented assessment is concerned with the actual task performance rather than the output or product of the activity. So how can we utilize it in mathematics teaching and learning? So for instance, while learning mathematical procedures, instructional explanations should not only present the single solution steps, the product, but additionally integrate conceptual information that illustrates why a specific solution step is meaningful and expedient. In that way, the reasoning process undertaken when solving a mathematical problem is made accessible to the student. Also, providing conceptual information behind a certain mathematical procedure will help students acquire flexible knowledge which is not bound to the mathematical situation in which the algorithm was learned. Furthermore, teachers use a variety of assessment methods to gather evidence about students' learning and then provide feedback to the students about their progress. Students need to understand clearly not only what is expected, but also whether their work is of acceptable quality. As what the NCTM assessment standards for school mathematics said, for assessment to be equitable and valid, each student must receive feedback over time on multiple occasions and in multiple formats on tasks that address the breadth of important mathematical content. And while feedback may be oral or written, formal or informal, private or public, geared toward an individual or group, still, it should be always be descriptive, specific, relevant, timely, and encouraging.
Good day, everyone. Since Jessica already discussed the process-oriented assessment is utilized in mathematics teaching and learning, we will now differentiate the analytical scoring rubric and the holistic rubric. Before we differentiate the analytic and holistic rubrics, let us first define what is a rubric. A rubric is a coherent set of criteria for students' works that includes descriptions of levels of performance quality on the criteria. Also, a rubric is a guideline for rating student performance. A rubric is a scoring tool that lists the criteria or what counts for a piece of work. A rubric is an evaluation tool that describes quality of work on a range from excellent to poor, and it is a communication tool. The analytic rubric is a two-dimensional rubrics with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria as rows. It allows you to assess participants' achievements based on multiple criteria using a single rubric. You can assign different weights or value to different criteria and include an overall achievement by totaling the criteria. Also, it is written in a table form. Here is an example of an analytic rubric. The first column shows the criteria: knowledge of forms, conventions, terminologies, and strategies relative to the importance of source to the subject, while the rest of the columns shows the standards. If the students demonstrates limited knowledge of forms, conventions, terminology, and strategies relative to the importance of the subject, then it reaches the adequate percentage, which is 50 to 59%. If the student demonstrates some of the knowledge, then it goes under the competent, which has 60 to 69%. However, if the students demonstrate considerable knowledge, then it would be under good, which has 70 to 79%. But if the student demonstrates thorough and insightful knowledge, then it would be under excellent, which has 80 to 100% of the standards based on the criteria. When to use the analytic rubrics? We use analytic rubrics if several faculty are collective assessing the students' works. Also, if outside audience will be explaining rubric scores, and if profile of specific strengths and weaknesses are desired. Now let us move on to the holistic rubric. Holistic rubric is a single criteria rubrics or one-dimensional. It is used to assess participants' overall achievement on an activity or item based on predefined achievement levels. Also, performance descriptions are written in paragraphs and usually in full sentences. Here is an example of holistic rubric. The first column shows the score and its percentage, while the second column shows the criteria. If the research paper demonstrates complete understanding and execution of the assigned objectives, then the score would be 4 and its percentage would be 80 to 100%. If the research paper demonstrates considerable understanding and execution of the assigned objectives, then the score would be 3 and thus the percentage of 70 to 79. However, if the research paper demonstrates some understanding and execution of the assigned objectives, the score would only be 2 and thus a percentage of 60 to 69. And if the research paper demonstrates limited understanding and execution of the assigned objectives, the score would be 1 and has the percentage of 50 to 59%. When to use a holistic rubrics? It is used when there is no correct answer or response to ask a task. For example, if it is a creative work. Also, if the focus is on overall quality, proficiency, or understanding of a specific content or skills. The assessment is summative. For example, at the end of the semester or major. A holistic rubrics is used in assessing significant numbers. For example, out of 150 students' portfolio. For more information about the holistic and analytic rubric is that holistic rubrics provide a single score based on an overall impression of a student's performance on a task. The analytic rubrics provides specific feedback along several dimensions and descriptors of the product. Also, holistic rubrics is used to score students' work as a whole, yielding one holistic score. Analytic rubrics breaks the objectives into components parts. Each portion is scored independently using a rating scale, and the final score is made up of adding each component's part. Here is a clearer view of holistic and analytic rubric. This is where my reports end. I am Laika Novio, and happy learning, everyone.
Good day everyone, I'm Gilbert Isasibuchi, BS 8 in Mathematics, third year college students. For today, I'm going to discuss holistic and analytic rubrics. What are rubrics? Rubrics are a tool for evaluating student work. There are two main types of rubrics, holistic and analytic rubrics. Holistic, a rubric that provides one overall scores, and analytic, a rubric that provides scores for different categories. Most of the rubrics in the math core curriculum are 4-point holistic rubrics. A rubric is often used in conjunction with an answer key. The rubric provides a broader picture about a student's demonstration of understanding the standards and mathematical practices, and the answer key provides a specific example of how a student might answer parts of the test. Learning outcomes. At the end of the discussion, the students will be able to distinguish between holistic and analytic rubrics and construct their own holistic and analytic rubrics. Why do I use rubrics? The primary purpose of a rubric is to provide specific feedback on critical elements of the test and the student work. In addition, rubrics may be used to show students the expectation before they perform a test, and to give student feedback and an opportunity to revision after they perform the test. Both of these uses strongly support student learning and achievement. When do I use rubrics? Rubrics are traditionally used to evaluate student work after student perform a test, especially a summative test. Rubrics are included for all the milestone tasks, as well as some other tasks. In the math curriculum for this purpose, rubrics can also be used before the task to communicate performance expectation to students, and after the task to communicate feedback and provide structure for revision or re-engagement. Sample 4-point holistic rubric. How do I use rubric? One way to give feedback to students is to make a copy of the rubric for each student, and then highlight or circle the parts of the rubric that apply to the student's work. For example, you might highlight the first and third paragraph of column 3, meets standards, and highlight the second paragraph in column 2, approaching standard. This feedback is useful for students because it gives them an indication of the next steps they could take to improve their work. If you are using holistic rubrics, you will sometimes need to decide whether to give only whole points or to sometimes give the half points. For example, if student work choose some elements from a score of 2, but mostly elements from a score of 2, you will need to decide whether to give that work a score of 2.5 or a score of 2. Using a rubric to assign grades. If you are using a rubric for an entry, apprentice, or an expert task, the rubric will be useful for informing your instruction and giving feedback to students, but it should not be used to give grades. Think about whether it is fair to expect mastery of the standards in the unit before assigning grades for students' work. If you are using a rubric for a milestone task and you want to use it, assign grade. Think about the score descriptors instead of converting the numbers to percent proportionally. For example, if you want to use this guide to convert rubric scores to grade. Analytic rubrics. Two-dimensional rubrics with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria as rows allows you to assess participant achievement based on multiple criteria using a single rubric. You can assign different weight value to different criteria and include an overall achievement by totaling the criteria. This is the example of analytic rubric. And that's all. Thank you.